Now, you know I like championing the underdog, or at least giving the underdog a fair crack of the whip, and I particularly happen to like Australia's colourful characters. I don't believe anyone should be written off for past misdemeanours. Which brings me to an incident at Parliament House, which has gone under the radar. It involves Steve Dickson, the former Liberal turned One Nation MP. You might remember him from previous incidents, such as courting the support of the National Rifle Association in the US, and there was something to do with a Washington, D.C. strip club. But moving on with his life, Steve stood as an independent candidate for the Senate in Queensland at the last federal election. Well, he's unsuccessfully been trying to complain about what he perceives as Australian Electoral Commission injustice. First, take a look at this.
Thank you. Thank you for your appearance today. If the committee has further questions, they'll be put to you in writing. Sorry, no, this is for committee members. No, this is for committee members. I'll have to suspend the hearing. I'm going to suspend the public hearing.
Okay, well, that is a screen recording of a live stream of the Joint Standards Committee in Electoral Matters hearing, which was a hearing last week at Parliament House in Canberra. Now, I'm going to bring Steve Dickson in a tick, but what he did there is he just fronted up to the microphone, uninvited, and he tried to tell his story. And let me just give you a bit of what that story is about. During the election, Steve Dickson heard that a number of voters were getting some kind of weird, strange stuff or misleading advice or whatever at the ballot box from Australian Electoral Commission officers regarding the ballot that his name was on. He took to his Facebook page to see how widespread the issue was, and there wasn't a flood of them, but there certainly were enough responses, such as this one, where electoral officers supposedly said to voters, oh, don't worry about those ones. Or another person said, I was told not to use them. They're blank spaces. They won't be counted, or they wouldn't be counted. I reported it to the supervisor. So it's a strange goings on. Some voters complained actually to the Australian Electoral Commission, who did apologise to some of them. One such apology was, conclusively, your vote will not be invalid if you mark the blank box above the line. I apologise that the polling officers have given you incorrect information. One issue which is perhaps understandable and which the Australian Electoral Commission allude to is the number of part-time workers taken on during the time of an election, 100-odd thousand or so, so there could be mistakes or errors made. The cause was taken up by Mr Dickson's campaign team, who found that their complaint about what they perceived to have occurred had been put on the Australian Electoral Commission's disinformation register. Okay. A few instances, and this is what it said on their disinformation register, a few instances of polling officials telling voters upon inquiry that they cannot number an unnamed box above the line on the Senate ballot paper is evidence of widespread and deliberate subversion of Senate election results. Nothing to see here. A complaint from Dickson's campaign manager elicited this response. In relation to your statement that Australian Electoral Commission staff have told voters that candidates must have dropped out or had withdrawn, we have looked into this and do not have any evidence of this occurring. So, a complaint to the Australian Federal Police also came to nothing. That's when Mr Dickson tried to raise the matter with the Joint Standards Committee into Electoral Matters, JCESM as it's called, but they wouldn't have it. So let's try to get to the bottom of this now with Mr Dickson, who joins me from Brisbane. Hi, Steve. Welcome to the show. You must have been pretty miffed to cause that scene in Canberra. You flew down from the Sunshine Coast. You got to the committee hearing. You grabbed the microphone. What made you go to those lengths, Steve?
Rowan, very, very straightforward. We've been stonewall from day one. Since the 16th of May, we've continued to prosecute this argument and to put forward what's so important to the Australian people. The AEC staff misled voters systematically right across this country, and it needs to be said. I sat down and listened to Tom Rogers speak for an hour and three-quarters about how good the brand is, how wonderful an election they ran, how they got everything right, and I'm sorry to say, they basically got everything wrong.
Now, explain, we've already shown viewers some of the Facebook complaints on your Facebook page, complaints claiming that Australian Electoral Commission staff had misled voters. You also asked for some statutory declarations, didn't you?
Oh, we did. We've got numerous statutory declarations of AEC staff systematically across Australia misleading voters, saying exactly the same words. If you vote in that box, your vote will not be counted. If you vote for those people, they pulled out of the election. I mean, how do they get it so wrong right across the country? I mean, if you had a business and your staff was telling people the total opposite to what your product you were selling, you'd have some serious concerns. And I think Tom Rogers, he was given a $500 million budget to do one job, and that's run an election campaign once every 3 years. And did they stuff it up? 100%. They got it wrong. And that's why I went to Canberra.
Now, Steve, you're not claiming that you would have won the election. Let's just make that really clear. So you're not concerned about that. What you're concerned about is
Rowan,
the process.
Rowan, that train has left the station long ago. I mean, this is about democracy. This is about what all Australians should believe in. Do we want a free, fair, frank, open election process in our country that we can all rely upon?
To be fair, though, and we all joke about it every election, the ballot form is pretty confusing, isn't it? You know, it's got all the squares. Do you vote above the line or below the line? There's all of that stuff that goes on. You also have the issue of, you've got 100,000 odd electoral officers turning up. They've only probably had a couple of hours training or whatever it might be. So putting all that to one side, what specifically do you believe was occurring in those ballot boxes where you've had statutory declarations or you've had complaints? And I'm not just talking about supporters of yours, but from other people.
Rowan, the only thing confusing about what's gone in the election, it's not the forms, it's when you have staff that you are paid handsomely and they've got to get it right. I mean, when you've only got one job over 3 years and you've got to give people accurate information that's going to show where their ballot vote's going to go, they've got to get it right. But when your staff are telling people actively on the telephone before the election in the pre-polling process, then on election day after they've been warned, and they're consistently telling voters right across Australia, if you vote in those empty boxes, your vote will not be valid. If you vote for those people, systematically right across the whole country, your vote won't count. I mean, that's not a mistake. You know, this is a really, really serious issue that I believe has got to be remedied. And again, this is just about democracy in our country. If we can't get that right, everything else underneath it will be broken for sure.
And Steve, it's also about accountability because you have gone through the correct procedures. You put forward 8 pages of evidence, which all turned out to be redacted. So there's 8 pages of redacted evidence that you submitted to that committee that we showed earlier. Then they kind of pulled the plug on you during the committee because you hadn't gone through whatever channels or whatever. But, you know, you were there doing the right thing. You were polite. You were trying to present your case. Where does this leave you? Do you have any further avenues to pursue to air your grievances?
Well, Ron, we're very fortunate. We did fly down to Canberra, myself, and I call Renee Eves Erin Brockovich because she makes Erin Brockovich look like she works for the Girl Guides, and I mean that very sincerely. This lady she's requested information, the literature that has been put forward between the Joint Standing Committee and the Australian Electoral Commission. They're supposed to answer questions and get back to that committee, of which they still haven't done. So I'll call on all Australians, and I'm thanking you again from Sky News. You guys believe in democracy. You believe in doing the right thing. And I'm very grateful that you're letting us air these issues tonight on your show. But, you know, it has to be resolved. We cannot let this go to the keeper because they've done the wrong thing. They need to admit they've done the wrong thing. And that's the only way we can move forward. I mean, democracy is very, very important. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're voting for Steve Dickson or Joe Bloggs or whoever it may be. Systematically across Australia, you should have confidence that whatever information you get from electoral staff, that information will be true and correct, and that you can follow it without hesitation whatsoever. That hasn't occurred, but getting back to the Joint Standing Committee and where we go from here, we're looking forward to getting that information from the Joint Standing Committee when it comes back from the Australian Electoral Commission, if it ever does. That's why I think we're dealing with one of the biggest cover-ups in political history in this country. And this is groundbreaking. You know, this moment in history is going to tell us whether or not we can count on elections in the future, or whether or not they're all going to be dodgy elections that you can't trust, and that people have been treated unfairly and biasedly by Australian electoral staff.
Steve Dickson, well, people can find you on your Facebook page and carry on putting forward their thoughts as well. You're absolutely right that democracy relies on accountability and integrity, particularly from the bureaucracies that look after our precious democratic right to vote. Steve Dickson, thanks so much for coming on the show this evening.
Rowan, thank you, and thank you, Sky News, for telling the truth. You'll have all my support in the world. We'll advertise you everywhere.
Steve Dickson, thanks so much. And we've heard from the Australian Electoral Commission, who say that, quote, it would not be appropriate for the AEC to comment on the work of a parliamentary committee, nor the processes by which they complete that work. Mr Dickson's baseless claim, they say, not only damages the public's confidence in Australia's election, but also disrespects the work these election workers performed in incredibly difficult conditions.